Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Today, I'll be interviewing Jacob Mark, who's a performance coach certified in the Wim Hof Method and is a level 2 instructor, as well as a certified Oxygen Advantage instructor. So we'll be going into depth around his trainings because he's built his coaching methods around helping people end their self-inflicted suffering to live truly authentic and abundant lives. And I met Jacob when I was actually doing one of my first ever coaching trainings. So I'm really excited to see how he's gone on this journey himself so we can explore also how cold exposure assists our brain health. Jacob, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Hey, Christina, thanks for having me. I'm equally as excited. This is awesome.
So, to start this conversation, can you tell us about how you discovered cold therapy and what drew you to it?
Well, to start off, I used to hate the cold.
Mm.
I grew up on the east coast of Canada where, it was right on the ocean. And even in the summer, I wouldn't go in. I would never go into cold water. And then I kind of went on a little bit of I don't like putting labels on it, but like a search of some sort. So I was pretty lost, even like when we had met. I was in a pretty dark place, even though I didn't really project it outward as much.
Mm.
And so, I was kind of like searching, like, how do we find, it was really a search for happiness, which in the end, I mean, I realized that's a really futile search anyway, because happiness comes from within. And and so I kind of was just watching YouTube, and all of a sudden this crazy guy came on the screen, and he was swimming in like freezing cold water. So
Iceman.
the Iceman himself, Wim Hof, yeah, he popped up on my screen. I'm like, what is this guy doing? Like, this is nuts. And it really intrigued me. And then I just heard a bit about his story and like looked more into it, and more people were talking about it. So I'm like, this could quite possibly be what I was looking for. I didn't know a lot about it, so I went to take one of his expeditions. I got to talk with him, learn from him, meet many people from around the world, and just getting into that cold water, as terrifying as it was for me at the beginning, was one of the most healing things in my life.
Wow. And what can you tell us more about like what your first experience was like and like what that meant for you from a mental perspective?
Yeah, the first time, honestly, was I was at my parents' house, just like house sitting for them. I filled up their tub with lukewarm water. It wasn't even that cold. And I got in and I freaked out. I started panicking, like my
Wait, because it
breath
was
got
warm?
it was lukewarm. It
Okay.
wasn't even that cold.
Okay.
So it wasn't like warm water, it wasn't cold water, it was just somewhere in the middle. And I started panicking. It was like it felt cold to me, and
Mm.
I didn't know like what was that necessarily happening within my body, and I started to panic. I started to, my breath started to get really fast. I started getting that stress response, that sympathetic stress response just hit me so hard. And
Mm.
it kind of terrified me at the beginning. And then I realized as I learned more about it, the next one got better, it got better. And what I realized, and I think we're probably going to get into this, but my ability to cope with the stressful situation, which is the ice bath, became so much better as we went along. My resiliency improved. And that was one of the biggest benefits I saw. So it just continued to get better as I went on.
Mm. And I guess as a coach, because you combine that right now with Oxygen Advantage, the Oxygen Advantage method. So, can
Yeah.
you explain a little bit what that is and why you now combine both of those methodologies with how you help your clients?
Yeah. So the Wim Hof method is really great, for a few things: reducing inflammation, balancing your immune system, for your mental health, and becoming more efficient with oxygen. And this is more of a, not necessarily focusing on your daily breathing, but in the moment, you're doing something that's very healing for yourself. And that's combining the Wim Hof breathing with the cold exposure. But I wanted to also find something that helps people on a daily basis, like really profoundly with their functional breathing. Because I would say like 80 to 90% of us are walking around with dysfunctional breathing. So we're not breathing optimally. Maybe we're breathing into our chest. Maybe we're not breathing, or we're breathing too many times. And all of these things are linked to a stress response. So our
Mm.
breath, if we're not breathing properly daily, and we're breathing too many times a minute, shallow, labored breathing, maybe we're breathing through our mouth too much. This is all stress. It's all different symptoms of stress. And so without even realizing it, people are walking around stressing themselves out with their breath. And so I really wanted to find something that kind of targeted that. that daily breathing. And that's what the Oxygen Advantage did for me. It really helped to improve not only my own, but my clients' functional breathing on a daily basis.
And that's because when you say dysfunctional breathing, I guess the way I interpret that is more like shallow versus deep diaphragm breathing. But it's
Yeah.
interesting that you said breathing out of your mouth, which
Hmm.
kind of also can be a stress response. So, what is healthy breathing
Yeah.
in comparison? Or are there also
You
many
know,
forms of healthy breathing depending on your, I guess, biochemical build?
I would say that like a general guideline that pretty much applies to almost everybody is breathing. If you read all of the old breath test or texts from whether it's from China, Asia, or India, or wherever it's from, they all say that about 6 breaths a minute is optimal. And most of us are breathing between 12 and 20, if not more.
Mm,
So if we can get our breath reduced to around 6, even 8 would be okay. And then if we're breathing through our nose and breathing deep into our belly. So light, slow, and deep breathing is really the optimal way. And your mouth really doesn't have any breathing benefits. It's a great, it's great to use your mouth if you're extremely exhausted. You feel like you have to get a lot of oxygen in, and think of an athlete who just can't breathe through their nose anymore because they're too tired. But
mm,
there's really no other benefits. Your nose, like we could talk about nose breathing, probably do a whole episode just on nose breathing. But really, it's like all of the benefits come from breathing through your nose, all of them, in terms of having more energy, being more efficient with your oxygen, having more oxygen delivery at a cellular level. All these different things happen predominantly with your nose.
interesting. And
Yeah,
why is that so under talked about? Because I feel like we're taught to breathe both ways in many different forms, even when it comes to
yeah.
conditioning. So, how come, when it comes to natural conditioning training, because I don't think I've ever heard mouth breathing is actually an obsolete thing,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's not, I don't think it's as well known. If you go to any um, like medical center, there's very few that have a specialty in, um, well, in breathing for sure, but like with your nose. Like there's not very many who have a specialty in that. And I don't know exactly what the reason is, but I feel like this is all fairly new potentially.
Mm,
We're learning a lot of new things. We're learning that, previously it used to be thought that because we breathe in oxygen, we blow off carbon dioxide, right? That's kind of how breathing works.
yeah.
And we always, you hear people talk about, even experts talk about, they say carbon dioxide is just an off gas. It's useless. We just blow it off. But it's actually extremely useful because we need it for what's called our hemoglobin in our blood to release oxygen. You need carbon dioxide for that to happen. So if your tolerance to carbon dioxide, meaning if you try to hold your breath right now on an exhalation, and you can only go for anything less than 25 seconds, then your tolerance to CO2, carbon dioxide, is pretty low. And therefore, you don't have optimal delivery of oxygen at a cellular level. And so with our nose, there's 50%, I believe, at least 50% more restriction to your breathing. So those CO2 levels can rise and you can release more oxygen. With your breath, with your mouth, you're just blowing off tons of CO2. It's very inefficient.
Hmm.
And you want to be more able to tolerate those levels of CO2.
I see. Fascinating. And I
Yeah.
guess going back to the cold therapy piece, what would you say, I guess, in comparison to this as well, when you're combining this breath work awareness with cold therapy, what would you say is one of the biggest breakthroughs you've ever experienced?
It's got to be just in terms of stress resiliency. So most people walk around and they are extremely stressed out. And at times it's controlling their entire lives. So for them to be able to live a daily life where they don't have this constant stress, because again, if we are stressed out with our breathing all day long, and then we have less resiliency to situations, and then also if our breathing is inefficient at night, so maybe you have sleep apnea or something else happening at night, that means your blood pressure is increased almost 24/7. And so if through these methods, through the cold exposure, we can um, help people to reduce or to become more resilient to everyday stress, and we can talk about how that happens with the cold. And
Hmm.
then we can also help them to physiologically help themselves through their breathing every day, reduce the stress. I mean, that's one of the most profound gifts I think you could give anybody, is
100%.
that peace in their daily life.
Yeah. And what do you know about what happens to the brain during this process and like our nervous system in general when you're being exposed to cold?
So with the cold exposure, it's pretty well known that you release a lot of endorphins.
Yeah.
Okay, so dopamine being a predominant one. And for people who are struggling with mental health, a lot of times they have a difficulty releasing that dopamine, which is the feel-good chemical. And so it's been known that like a lot of people who suffer from depression, they will practice cold therapy because it changes your biochemistry in your brain and in your body and reduces the stress and increases those feel-good hormones. So you can start changing the way you feel through cold
Mhm.
exposure, and it retrains your body to feel good again. So it is a type of therapy for depression or, you know, almost any, I mean, almost any mental health disease or issue, I guess, so to speak.
And what have you experienced, I guess, personally with your clients as you've been guiding them through cold therapy and also with the oxygen advantage methods? Is there anything that you can share that kind of brings that to life from everything we've just talked about?
So I just want to re-clarify. So there's the cold exposure and then there's the Wim Hof breathing, which are both very powerful. So
Mm,
the cold exposure you know, the Wim Hof method is not just cold exposure, it's also really powerful breath work also. And then there's the oxygen advantage.
mhm.
So out of everything, I mean, we don't like to, I'm always hesitant to share, you know, anecdotal evidence because people take it as a guarantee or a promise that it's going to do something for them or heal them. I have to really be clear that this really begins with your mindset. If you
Mhm.
go into this and you believe it can work, it can really heal a lot of things. And I have anecdotal evidence of people who, from schizophrenia, have
Mm,
attributed these methods to helping them totally get off their medication.
yeah.
To people with different autoimmune disorders, that is a massive area of healing that these methods help with, because they balance your immune system and reduce inflammation. I have people with PTSD, me included, who have learned to um, navigate that and to heal from that using these methods. So I mean the people with cancer, I mean diabetes, I have such a long list of people who have healed from these things. Um, and again, I just want to really reiterate that this is a person by person basis. We don't advertise that this heals anybody. It's really
Yeah.
going to depend on the person. But yeah,
Your mindset and your intention of,
yeah,
I guess, how you can use
absolutely.
this as a tool. And
Yeah.
for people, because I would say I love cold. I love
Hmm.
cold environments and I love plunge pools and like doing cold showers from time to time. But the whole idea of like getting fully immersed, like going up a mountain without any clothes on, which I also understand part of like the Wim Hof training. I'd love
Yeah.
to get like more insight from you on for people who are new to cold therapy, who might have never done anything or experimented with cold as like a way of boosting their nervous system or energy. Because for me, I guess it's more of like a ritual that I do when I'm feeling not necessarily every day, because sometimes I don't actually have the courage to get
Yeah.
cold. Although I do enjoy it, it's just not my preference. But I try and do it as
Yeah.
often as I can because you immediately do feel that rush. And it's like
Yeah.
it's something that as a state, you kind of like tune into and you can measure it from that perspective.
Yeah.
So for people who've never maybe done anything related to cold therapy, where would you say would be a good place to start?
Well, first, I think we need to talk about why they're doing it. Okay,
Mm,
so I mean, become this huge trend, and a lot of people have no idea why they're even doing it. They just do it because they see other people doing it, which I think is amazing that so many people are dipping.
yeah.
But what we're literally doing here, I mean, there's many benefits, but to me, the most profound one is what cold exposure is. It's called a hormetic response, is what you're experiencing. So hormesis means we experience a stressor in small amounts. So we deliberately expose ourselves to stress in small amounts to then become more resilient. So whether that's cold exposure, the Wim Hof breathing, going for a workout, these are all hormetic forms of stress. So cold exposure is one of the best forms of deliberate stress I know of, where we deliberately put ourselves into a stressful environment to learn how to regulate our nervous system. So when I lead people through ice baths, for example, one of the most rewarding experiences for me and most profound experiences for me is when I can see the person go from in that environment being panicked, having that full on stress response, deer in the headlights, increased heart rate, increased breath rate, all the things, to then learning how to transition into a calm state where by the end of the ice bath, they're laughing and having a full on conversation with me. And
Mm.
that's a life lesson I mean, it's transferable to every day of your life. Whether you have a boss who's not the nicest person, or you're in a relationship that's fairly toxic, right? If you can take those skills and when you're in those stressful environments, learn how to regulate your nervous system to then be calm and know that you're going to be okay. That's a profound lesson. And so with this, I definitely always hesitate to tell people to jump right into an ice bath. It's always gradual exposure is the best.
Yeah.
So, you can go to a workshop and learn, and you'll go right into an ice bath, and that's a different story because you're learning from somebody who's an expert in it and they can guide you properly. But if you're going to do this from home and you're going to begin with no experience, start with going into a warm shower, then turning it to cold for maybe 10, 15 seconds, whatever you can tolerate, and then go back to warm. And do that for a while. Just get used to what the cold feels like.
Mm.
And then what you do is you have a warm shower, you have a cold, and you start extending that cold time that you're experiencing in the shower. Whereas eventually you're going having a warm shower, you're going to cold, and you're not going back to warm anymore. And then you build up to just a straight up cold shower. And then once you feel you're tolerating that pretty well, go into, maybe if you have a bathtub at home, fill it up with cold water, have an ice bath. And then the optimal, or the not the optimal, but kind of the most I guess intense form of cold exposure would be doing it in nature, especially during the cold months. So I mean, I
Mhm.
live in Canada. Some days get to be like -30 outside
Wow.
Celsius,
Mm.
and we cut holes in the ice in a river, and we get in. And that would be, you never do that alone. Cold exposure in general, you'd always want to have somebody there with you because you never know how you're going to respond day in or day out.
Yeah.
Especially in nature, you always have use a buddy system, have somebody there and be extremely safe. But that's kind of how I would build up and suggest people to build up.
Mm. Because that's one thing I was also thinking about. If you're unaware of like the method and the combination of factors that comes with the cold exposure, with the breathing, like
Yeah,
if I did a cold bath tomorrow, how am I guaranteed? How do I know if I'm doing it correctly and
yeah.
measuring the right bodily response and not putting myself into like a hypothermic mode?
Yeah, it's extremely unlikely you'll ever hit hypothermia.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
I did wonder for like for some people that might experiment without the training, since it's
yeah,
become such like a trend on like this is good for you, and I'm sure some people just like go all in without even really thinking about what the method is,
yeah.
as a healing practice. But I've always wondered like, is that a risk?
So in nature, I would say if you're dipping in nature alone,
Yeah.
definitely a higher risk for that. Because
Okay.
what typically happens is, um, if you're in nature and you're alone, you're dipping and something bad happens, now you're stuck in the water for whatever reason for extended periods of time. Yeah, for sure, you could experience hypothermia. But if
Hmm.
you're in a controlled environment at your home, you can likely get out of the cold very easily. And this is why, again, having a buddy system, if you're unsure, is a really good idea. But this all really comes down to listening to your body. And there's a really, and there's a fine line here, but there's a distinction that you have to make for yourself. It's, am I getting out of the cold because I'm just uncomfortable, or am I getting out because I've actually had enough? And that's only a distinction you can make, because getting out just because you're uncomfortable after, say, 20 seconds is a larger, metaphor for life, where are we always just going to shy away from uncomfortable situations? Or are we
Hmm.
going to teach ourselves that we can become resilient and we can actually get through the stress?
Yeah.
So that's a distinction you have to make, and that's why, again, we say gradually, if you're not going to go with a coach right away, because then you learn to listen to your body as you gradually build up.
Hmm.
And secondly, if you do go with a coach, which is probably the best way to start, is that you can learn in a really safe environment with a professional where that limit is for yourself, because you're not going to get hurt at a workshop, that's for sure.
Hmm. Interesting. And I always wondered that because I know there has to be a lot of respect with the cold and
Yeah,
the environments we put ourselves in, and especially when it comes to like nature induced circumstances, there's like Mother Nature is always more powerful 100%.
of
So
course.
I always wondered
Yeah.
how people balance that when they had that intention of exploring cold. But
It's a time where you have to set your ego aside.
yeah.
You really have to. I see it, especially around my community, there's been some dangerous situations that have happened among some of these groups that dip. And that's
Mm,
because it becomes a competition. And
mm,
it's like looking at what the other people are doing, and then you start timing yourself. Timing yourself in the cold once in a while, there's no real harm to that. But if you become a person who wants to time every single cold exposure that you perform, and that every time you have to hit 3 minutes, I have to hit 5 minutes, no matter what, even if I feel terrible, I have to hit it. That's not listening to your body. And now you're just totally controlled by the time and fully in that ego mode,
yeah.
right? And that's dangerous.
And what would you say on average, like, I mean, not to create an ego expectation here, but I do want to ask this question out of curiosity for like the first time dipper, like when they're going into like what is the usual, I guess, no, let me phrase this correctly. How much time can people sustain usually on their first dip when they're doing this for the first time? And I'm asking more a personal curiosity because I
Yeah,
have never
yeah.
had my first dip. So I'm just curious to know like what that would entail as a process.
That's a hard one. And especially because the difference predominantly lies in your mind.
Mm,
So if we take, for example, say that everybody's equal, there's no underlying health conditions that would stop anybody from doing cold exposure. Okay. The only thing that's going to stop one person from staying in longer versus another is the mind. The only thing that's going to stop one person from getting in versus another is their mind. It's going to talk them out of it. So it's really difficult to say what a beginner's time is. Because I mean, I've run a lot of workshops, and you know, when I coach people, I'd say 99%, even if it's their first time, stay in the ice bath for 2 minutes.
no,
Which,
that's
if you're
impressive.
sitting here,
Already
what's
very,
that?
I find that already
Yeah,
impressive as like kind of like a range. I was just looking at the range of as part of the training where you start.
yeah. But to give you kind of a general guideline, so I don't know if you've heard of him. His name is Dr. Huberman. Have you heard of him?
It does ring a bell.
He is a really great person. I believe he's a scientist at Stanford University, but he puts out a lot of great scientific information, and he lays it out in terms that, average people like me can understand.
Hmm.
And basically, he compiled all the research on cold exposure, which most of it is done on immersion. So sitting in water with the water up to your shoulders. And on average, what seems to be optimal for most people, again, not everybody, is 11 minutes a week. Now, the temperature of the water is really going to depend. Anything that's, I believe, 16 degrees Celsius or less has benefits.
Okay.
And so the colder the water gets, then that 11 minutes shrinks down. So maybe if you're going into water that's 1 to 3 degrees, maybe that's only 6 minutes a week. And you can split that up however you want. You can do a 30-minute or 30-second exposure, a minute exposure. It's been shown that water at, I think it was 4 degrees Celsius for 20 seconds released a lot of adrenaline, which that's actually a benefit in this case for what we're trying to achieve.
Wow.
So, so yeah, I mean, it's pretty powerful. You don't have to do long times if the water is cold.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, I look forward to having my first dip one day with
Yeah.
you, Jacob. We'll do it in
Yeah.
Poland with Wim Hof, or
Oh
maybe
yeah.
whenever you do your next European workshop.
That would be awesome.
Love to have that experience. And
Yeah.
I want to thank you personally also for sharing your insights with us in the community today. And before we conclude this, I'd like to also invite you to do a cognitive assessment. So I believe
All
you
right, I'm nervous.
the link there, but enjoy it. It's a good way to also test your brain health and give insight on your own cognitive abilities as we're talking about all of these things. And it's also a big part of why we do what we do when it comes to being in this field of mental health. So, whenever you're ready, share your screen with me and let's see how well you do.
All right, here we go. I'm just gonna close that. Okay.
If you can, so we can watch
Yes.
you in live action.
There we go. Can you see it now?
Yeah, perfect.
All right. All right. Start task.
Okay, so you got to keep the cursor in the middle of the bowl and then press the space bar. Oh, okay, oh, you know what to do. Okay, okay. 100%
I'm a pro.
accurate. Oh, look at that.
This is next
Oh,
level difficult.
wow, ice cold therapy must be something.
Oh wait,
100.
we're not done yet. Don't talk me up too much.
I'm trying to distract you. I'm trying to see if I can get the ego activated. I'm joking.
Oh, it's in
Really?
full mode right now.
Okay. Oh, look at that. Okay, percentage staying pretty up there, guys. Don't know. Not bad, not bad. Sharp. Definitely sharp. Can't say nothing at this stage, can't we?
Oh my goodness, we did it.
Look at that. You did it at 100%. Well, that must mean your brain health is top notch.
I'm just on a good day today. It's Friday, so
So really good work, Jacob. Thank you so
yeah,
much for being with us today and sharing all this incredible knowledge. It's honestly been very inspiring to talk to you.
yeah. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.